What's up, ladies and gentlemen? It is No Cap Space, another edition of Tales from the Beat, where we go out, find the best beat writers in America, bring them on the show, and talk about a little bit of women's basketball. And in order to do that, we had to go to the Rose City, to Oregon, a former haunt, to find one of the best beat writers you'll find in the state of Oregon, if not the entire PNW, if not the entire United States. His name is Sean Highkin. He has Rose Garden Report under his belt. It is a very popular publication that you should subscribe to. Sean, welcome for joining the show, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Andrew. This is good. I'm like checking off the No Cap Space checklist because I was just in Indy for All-Star and I got to meet Tyler and Shawnee in person for the first time and hung out with them a bunch. And now, like, it's good to be doing this with you.
Yeah, I was gonna say, once you hit Greer, it's like putting the final Infinity Stone into the gauntlet,
yeah.
And then you're officially a No Cap Spacer at that point, man.
Yeah, I mean, I've been a fan of your guys' work pretty much the whole time. Like, really, since you started it, like early on. Like, first of all, like I had just been following Shawnee on Twitter for like 5 years just because she's hilarious and like I've enjoyed following her. And then when you guys started this thing a couple of years ago, that was also when, and I'm sure this is just a lot of what we're going to be talking about. I kind of started to get an idea that the Portland WNBA expansion stuff was pretty real. And I've kind of realized, okay, I need to start, I've always been like a pretty casual watcher of the W. Like I like watching it. I know, for most of the last 5 years or so, I've like known who the big stars are and who the good teams were, but I couldn't like go up and down every roster and know who everybody is like I do in the NBA. And so once I kind of got an idea that the Portland thing might actually happen, I started being like, okay, well, I got to start like following this more closely. Now I got to start, reading, more stuff, listening to more pods. And I just love the way you guys cover the league because you guys, for the most part, like you can't avoid getting into it sometimes. For the most part, you guys do a really good job of just covering the basketball stuff and not really dealing with like the culture war bullshit that a lot of the, coverage of the W these days traffics in.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that because, it's one of those things, and I talked about it a lot on previous shows and mailbags and stuff, like the middle ground beat reporter infrastructure that was really created during the golden age of newspapers didn't really extend out to women's sports and to a lesser extent Major League Soccer in that respect, right? So you have this like weird dynamic where it's massive networks or really, really small creators, but there isn't that like middle ground of like trusted fact finder that you typically associate with like an old school newspaper beat reporter type of position. And I feel like that's in having more of these teams and getting more NBA writers over from NBA markets like yourself who do a great job covering the Trailblazers, and also just more papers or outlets finding beat reporters in general. It feels like we're starting to get, a middle ground back. But the first year of the Caitlin Clark experience in the WNBA, I feel like it's really laid bare that gap of like, you either are looking at network shows like a First Take or something, or you're going to a hyper niche creator. And then there's just this kind of middle ground there that we're still trying to piece in,
Yeah, absolutely. And I think some of the more traditional media outlets over the last few years have done a really good job of starting to, cover it more, kind of just more traditionally. Like I'm sure you know her too, but Annie Costable she's now with Front Office Sports, but she was with the Sun-Times for a long time. She's one of my best friends. I used to live in Chicago, so we've been friends for like 10 years. And when she got put on that beat from, when she was at the Sun-Times, the Sky beat, she like fought really hard to be like, look, we need to just treat this like it's an NBA beat or an NFL beat, and we need to travel to every road game, and we need to just cover this the way that we would cover any other professional major league sports team. And to her editor's credit, they said okay, and they did it. And then their traffic, I mean, maybe it helped that it was like right during when the Sky were making their title run, and was that 21 or 22, whatever year that was. But
21.
But like their traffic started crushing, and then like the investment kind of paid off, and now you're starting to see like, obviously, when the Fever drafted Caitlin, that was such a phenomenon that the Indy Star put someone on the beat that travels. And because of like there's all this hype around the Valkyries, like with the expansion season, the San Francisco Chronicle has someone that traveled. My friend Maddie, I also knew from Chicago. She also used to cover the Warriors. She just got hired by the New York Post, and she's traveling with the Liberty now. So you're kind of starting to see that, and I think that's when I've been covering it over the last couple of years. I've mostly just been covering the news as it happens when it relates to the expansion rollout, but that's kind of the lane that I'm kind of hoping to occupy starting next spring and next summer, when this team actually exists beyond a name and a logo and actually has a coach and a GM and a roster and has games to cover. That's kind of going to be the goal, to do kind of the same thing that I've been doing for years with the Trailblazers and with the NBA.
So let's dive into that, because I have somebody that worked in Eugene for a few years and was around right in the midst of the Oregon and Oregon State women's basketball craze, really when that rivalry, I would argue, for that period of time was probably one of the best in women's college basketball. You'd have like these Elite Eight, Sweet 16, like the regionals were in Portland, and, Sabrina's at the Moda Center and they upset Mississippi State and it's totally sold out. What has the groundswell been in Portland as a city over the last handful of years that I guess got us to this point where there is a franchise that is going to get going starting next year?
Well, it just made so much sense from the beginning as a market for the WNBA to expand into, and much in the same way that, when they announced they were going to the Bay Area, that just made a lot of sense too, for a lot of the same reasons, like a lot of the same, political, values that, a lot of people in this city very vocally have. And then, when you look at like the support for women's sports, you bring up the Oregon and Oregon State basketball programs, and obviously the Ducks had a huge run those few years with Sabrina and Satu and all that stuff, and they had those tournament runs. But also, like, the Thorns have been the most well-attended NWSL team basically since, I think there's a couple years where maybe they were like not number one, but for the most part, they've led the NWSL in attendance every year that league has existed. And then the other thing, and just kind of another proof of concept, I want to say this was about 2 years ago, maybe somewhere in there, a bunch of Portland like sports, power brokers. It was like Ron Wyden was hosting it, the senator. And then it was like some Blazers executives, some Thorns, higher ups. They all hosted Kathy Engelbert at this kind of pep rally event to basically try to sell her on why Portland should get a WNBA team. And this is when they were first starting to talk about maybe possibly thinking about looking at maybe doing expansion. And so they were trying to get their hat in the ring there. And the place that they hosted this event at was the Sports Bra, which you've probably heard of. It's gotten a lot of national attention, but this is kind of a crazy concept. It is a sports bar that only airs women's sports. Like I think it was the first of its kind in the country. And, it's gotten a lot of national coverage because it was such a new thing, but like it's done really well. They've started franchising it out. I actually just saw Jenny, the founder of it, in Indy at the All-Star game. She was at a lot of the stuff. I talked to her for a little bit, and they're like just in the process of franchising it out and opening them up in a few different cities. And then a few other like copycat. I don't want to say copycat because it's great that there's more of these starting up that aren't affiliated with them, but like other, it's been so successful here that other cities are starting to be like, hey, we need to do this too. And, I've only been there a couple of times, and it's been just like kind of on normal nights. It's been, pretty chill. And, it's just kind of like going to any normal sports bar. But I've heard that for Thorns games or, big, NCAA tournament games or World Cup games or, that type of stuff, it's like lines out the door. You can't even get a table. And so I would imagine that once the W team starts up next summer, it's probably going to be the same thing there. But the fact that a business like that didn't really exist anywhere else in the country opened first in Portland and was so successful, like that just makes it so obvious that, this was a market that would make sense for the W to come back into once they decided to actually start looking at expansion. And then you add into it that, Portland has such like a hipster retro like aesthetic among a lot of people. And like the fact that like the Portland Fire existed for 3 years in the early 2000s, they never won anything. They never made the playoffs. They folded after 3 years. But I still, for years, even before this new expansion team became a possibility, I was seeing like people wearing old Fire shirts, or like I'll go to Blazer games. I'll see people wearing like Jackie Styles jerseys sometimes. Like it's even if those people like were not even WNBA fans, it was just a cool retro thing to, to wear around because it was like a retro hipster thing that only a few people know about, even though the Fire actually were one of the better attended W teams. I think at the time they were getting like 8,000 fans a game, which for the time was really good for where the WNBA was at the time. And so it just made so much sense once they got the right ownership group in place. Obviously, they had a little bit of a hiccup there. It was supposed to get announced a year before it was. It was supposed to get announced at the same time as Golden State, and it was going to start up this summer instead of next summer. But then the ownership group fell through at the last minute, but then they were able to get her back on track a year later. So since then, it's just, and I was actually not at the launch event for the actual name and logo the other day because I was still in Vegas doing summer league with the Blazers. But I saw, like, I have friends that went. I saw the turnout. I saw, just how packed it was and how excited people were. I saw that the lines for the merch were like around the block. They did it at the courtyard at the Moda Center, and like they put out the they put out the release that they've sold over 11,000 season ticket deposits, which that's pretty good. That's well on their way to kind of where Golden State is, where they've sold out all their home games so far in their expansion season. So the fan interest is there. The thing I've been a little bit more concerned about that I guess we'll get into and, curious about is how now that the team exists and people in Portland are excited about it, are they, is the ownership group going to be able to deliver on it? And what is the team actually going to look like? And, what are they going to do about their coaching hire? What are they going to do about their GM hire? How are they going to approach the expansion draft? Is it going to be like what Golden State has done, where they basically built a competitive team right away that's probably going to make the playoffs as an expansion team? Or is it going to be like most expansion teams where they're not going to be very good for the first couple of years and you hope you get a franchise player in the lottery with some of these, college classes that are coming out in the next couple of years? So there's a whole lot to, get into over the next, I guess, what would be 8-9 months until their inaugural season actually starts. But the base level of fan interest and support is absolutely there.
Yeah. And that I'm excited to dive into all of those things. And there is so much that has bubbled up, especially in the last year with this team. And for those of you that are watching on YouTube or hearing the free preview, subscribe to the Bald Knowers tier on No Cap Space WBB, and you'll be able to listen to the rest of this in full.